it is what it is. We'll be back soon. I keep saying that, we will be. I promise. Well, ladies and gents, it's about time we made a change. The reptile shed had gotten to a point it was in an absolute state. The vivs were falling apart and it just wasn't nice to look at. You see, a lot of these vivs are typical commercial vivs, so they're typically made of furniture board. And for the most part this works, it's cost effective and it does the job. But it doesn't stand up well with high humidity enclosures. Not to mention, the animals were growing faster than I could keep up with the upgrades. So one day I decided to just rip it all down. Besides, how can I make videos about proper animal care when I don't live up to my own standards? So I took a month unpaid leave from work and I ripped it all down. I have to say, it was really weird having the shed with no animals in, but it was the easiest way to get this done. And it was time to build a more homely, cost-effective, sustainable shed with the animals in mind. I got to work lining it with MDF panelling. And the shed door was also in a state. It's the result of my first real DIY attempt about 5 years ago. I wanted to make a barn style door, but it just didn't go to plan. For some reason I cut straight through one of the main bearers. So it's time to build a new one. And I think it's fair to say I understand DIY and carpentry a bit better now. I'm very proud of that door. Now the MDF does more than just provide a wall. It also makes the shed more sustainable by trapping air. Trapping air in this manner essentially acts as insulation, creating another barrier the heat has to go through before escaping. And I have noticed my energy bills decrease since I've installed this. I did rush it though. I wasn't too bothered about the effect, and I also only used 6mm MDF to save money. Realistically, maybe I should have used around 12mm. It would have stopped it from bowing and it would have stopped some of the unsightly gaps. But most of them are going to be hidden anyway, and as I say, I'm really not fussed by it. This was a job I just wanted done so I could get started on everything else. Do you remember the 7-foot aquarium? Well, that's gone. All of the upgrades depended on the space that the other animals would be using. And unfortunately, this meant that the fish and the 7-foot aquarium would have to receive a very minuscule downgrade. There was another motive as well. My house isn't really ideal for such a large aquarium, and it was always in the back of my mind stressing me out that one day if it leaks or bursts, I'm gonna be ruined. I rent my house and I cannot afford to replace the flooring. Sitting in the living room, it also acted as a very inefficient radiator, especially in the winter months. So it's time to build my own aquarium, made out of wood, in the shed. Once the frame was done, I threw in MDF panelling again, and then fiberglassed all of it. Now I didn't record any of this because it was an absolute nightmare, and to be honest, I was just fed up with the camera getting in the way. But the viewing panel went in, and all was good. It was watertight the first time. And then I got to work on something a little different. All of the animals' upgrades were relatively easy. Not necessarily to build, but more in the sense it made sense where they went. Who would get what, and what would slot into each other. For instance, Jason's new vivarium sits perfectly on top of the wooden aquarium. But throughout all the upgrades there was one that just didn't make sense and wouldn't fit anywhere. And that's Roscoe. I didn't have space to house Roscoe anywhere. Not in the way that I wanted to. The previous enclosure was 9 foot by 2 foot. So it was 18 foot squared. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't ideal, and it was only intended to be temporary. Realistically, heating wise, it wasn't ideal for the heat elements to be that close to the ground. It limits the space and it limits the effectiveness of the floodlights. And that's when one day I had the thought, what if I'd go the easiest route and I don't build a second enclosure, a new enclosure? What if instead I just release the monster? And now almost the entire shed belongs to Roscoe. I built a double door system, and now Roscoe has what is essentially a 6 foot by 7 foot enclosure, totaling a 42 square foot enclosure. And it was the easiest to build out of all of them, even utilising the spare space underneath the wooden aquarium. This does, however, pose some other challenges, but that's something I'm willing to put up with. The next on the list is Jason. Jason used to be a 3 foot snake in a 6 foot enclosure, but he's now a 7 foot snake in a 6 foot enclosure. Now in my experience that is better than the average. A lot of people keep snakes in enclosures that are far too small in my opinion. But they deserve better. So Jason's upgrading to a 5 foot enclosure. Just bear with me here. Now that wooden panel on the right hand side of the 5 foot enclosure is a temporary hatch. Hopefully this summer, but it may have to wait till 2025. We'll be building the second portion of the enclosure, which will then attach to the open hatch. And that will create a grand total of an 11 foot long enclosure. The morning geckos have finally seen their long awaited upgrade. But more on that in another video. Marie still hasn't received hers. You might recall the 7-foot tank I made a couple of years ago, that we never ended up using. I was in over my head in this rented property, and it's now in storage waiting for me to buy my own house someday, and finally use it. Here's where things get a bit weird though. I've been losing fish over the past few years, but at no alarming rate. Around 1 a month. They were passing in the old tank and the new tank, so it's not the tank that's the issue. I tested the water constantly. Ammonia 0, nitrite 0, and nitrate sits at around 20 parts per million. They were passing with no odd behaviour, visible infection or wounds, no inflammation, so maybe the water's contaminated. But I use the same water for all my aquariums and haven't experienced any other losses. So I think they may just be near the end of their lifespan. I have had them for a fair few years now. I'm not certain, but I found zero other reason, and we now only have 1 remaining. I was intending to restock this tank someday. I even bought glass to build a new aquarium for Marie, but I've now come to the conclusion, as morbid as it is, if we just wait for the final lad to make his journey, then the fish can pass the aquarium onto another that will make amazing use of it, and it's even bigger than the tank I intended to build it. Gary and Phil received their upgrade. I have some bad news though. We lost Phil. We'll talk about it more in another video. He deserves a proper send-off and the best homage I can manage. I am glad to say though that he enjoyed his new enclosure for around a year and really made the most of it. It's just me and Gary now. We have some new additions to the team. Firebelly Toads and Yellowbelly Toads. Steve the Royal Python. And some baby White Cloud Mountain Minnow, offspring of the adults that live with Marie. It's been a tough couple of years, but I'm proud of how far we've come. I've really missed you all and I can't tell you how much your support in the last video means to me. I honestly couldn't ask for a better audience. I really hope you all have a good year ahead. I've got a lot to show you and I genuinely cannot wait. I'll see you in the next one.